Good morning on the East and West Coast from the Women's Business Collaborative. We are the only movement for businesswomen to accelerate position power for clearly with parity. And we're thrilled to have 48 women's business organizations as our partners, reaching some 2 million women. We can't do it without men. As you will see today from Mayor John Mitchell joins with Mayor Lily May. We are on the cutting edge of changing the numbers, of getting women CEOs, C-suite, boards of directors, more entrepreneurs getting capital, and get to parity and diversity in all that we do. WBC also hooked up and said, we want to do more for entrepreneurs in our cities. And we did that with a major magazine in March, reaching out to 1 million women entrepreneurs on the story of getting entrepreneur capital way beyond PPP. And then we hooked up with Grubhub to host Restaurant Her, because we've all got favorite women-owned restaurants. And we know that restaurants, as these two mayors will share with you, as is with retail, the backbone of our communities. And they needed our support, and they needed us to tell the stories of how we are ordering and delivering and truly supporting that food chain up the system. It is our joy to say our cities are the economy, they are our jobs, they are the backbone in terms of getting COVID and healthcare, and it is the mayors that are those leadership. And no one is better at that story of looking at smart cities, growth cities, and compassionate, advanced leaders than Sandra Bayer. Sandra Bayer is very active in the Women's Business Collaborative as a leader and now the advisory council, but she is so respected at thinking through the future of our city with our mayors. Sandra?
Thank you, Edie. Gosh, it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you to the Women's Business Collaborative for hosting this event. You know, as Edie just said, I work with mayors for a living, and I pay a lot of attention to what they're doing to really change the way we live and work, the way we travel. Certainly the pandemic has affected all of our lives, along with many other crises on the planet. Yet I always find that city leaders in the form of leadership mayors are the ones really making a difference, really helping us understand how to recover, and in this case, thrive going forward. It is my great pleasure to introduce two leadership mayors, John Mitchell of New Bedford, Massachusetts, and Lily May of Fremont, California. I'll just give you a very brief background because I want them to talk more about what they're doing and thinking and where they're heading. But first of all, John Mitchell was elected first in 2013 as the mayor of New Bedford, Mass. He was recently re-elected for a 4-year term in 2019. So he's going to be with us a little longer, thank goodness, for sure. He is one of the mayors that I remember meeting him years ago, that was always willing to listen to new ideas and to accept sort of responsibility for leading how a city operates, what works, what doesn't work, rethinking it, reshaping it. I love that the website of New Bedford right now, you all should check it out. It says it's lighting the way. Is that right? Yes, lighting the way. And they have this huge big lighthouse on the cover of the website. I spent a lot of time looking at city websites, and most of them need a lot of work. But both Mayor Mitchell's and Mayor May's websites are really focused on what they're doing and how they're helping their residents and their visitors. I think Mayor Mitchell is also famous for working in the energy arena. I remember when they were the solar power kings of the cities, and now wind energy is a big part of his energy commitment. He's also the head of the energy committee for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So I think there's a lot going on in the energy field that you all should check out through what Mayor Mitchell is leading. I also want to introduce Mayor May. Lily was elected in 2016 as the first woman minority mayor in Fremont, California in its 63-year history. I love that idea. And it's so exciting that Lily, you've really changed the face of how we think about what's getting done in a city like Fremont, 200,000 plus population, 220,000, I guess. And I think Lily is really famous for creating a city where where people are happy. It's considered one of the happiest cities in America, one of the most caring cities in America. I mean, think about that recognition. This is really special. So Lily is also very involved in transportation and infrastructure for the city, and I know she'll be talking about some of those efforts. And finally, for both mayors, you know, there is an effort to really help cities recover from the pandemic and really think outside of all the boxes. What are the new approaches? What are the new coalitions that we need to form to approach a very uncertain future? So I think you'll hear these answers from both mayors, and you'll hear ideas, hopefully news you can use in your community. First of all, Lily, let's start off with you. Why don't you give a little bit more introduction about what's going on in Fremont, what efforts you're leading to help us recover from the pandemic, and especially what are you doing to help small and medium enterprise in Fremont?
Well, thank you, Sandra and Edie, for your kind introduction and for the opportunity to be here today. I am delighted to be at the 4th largest city in the Bay Area, and our population, we haven't had the official census count, but I think it's a little, probably close to over 250,000 right now. So it's over about a 50% Asian population. And I'll touch upon some of that later when I talk about some of the support that we've done with restaurants. We are the 3rd largest Asian majority city. We have also the largest concentration of technology manufacturing here in Fremont. It is over 900 plus advanced manufacturers, and some of them that people have probably heard of the most include Tesla as the largest automotive factory west of the Mississippi. It's got over 20,000 employees here in our city. And we also are focused on solar and other battery areas. So some of our council priorities I'd like to share with you include COVID recovery and some of our efforts in particular on supporting our businesses and communities. We've given out over $1 million in aid, and we have been very active in trying to ensure that the CARES Act programs weren't just applicable to cities that were greater than 500,000, which would have excluded Fremont, but we were able to, in this most recent round, be able to secure direct funding and allocation for some of the programs directly for our community versus at the county pool level. We are also focused on rebuilding our tax base. One of the things that I think many cities were struggling with was the impact of COVID on their economic communities. But because of the fact that some of our businesses are in manufacturing and logistics, we have Amazon hub as well as one of the largest UPS logistics centers. So not only do we build the products, we're able to deliver and ship that. And that's been critical if you look at last year's conversations about supply chain. And who would have thought we'd have a rush on toilet paper? And then finally, we are also focused on continuing to address homelessness through increased programming to support our residents. Our COVID situation as a whole right now is currently improving, and we're hoping that the governor will be removing some of the restrictions by June 15th. And while Fremont's general fund is currently experiencing some deficit, our local economy, again, was less impacted due to our industrial base. Our key core industries in those areas are manufacturing of biomedical, clean technology, and all considered what would be essential industries. And so those did not cease during 2020. And in fact, some of those really ramped up. And I'll share some of those later in terms of some of the processes by which we as a city were able to help facilitate and ensure not only are we moving forward, but moving forward safely. And then we continue our investment, as I mentioned, into new manufacturing, which is a key driver of both property tax, sales tax for our city. And that means our unemployment rate has already rebounded. At one point last year, we had during our annual retreat, we had told people that our unemployment rate was just over 2% pre-COVID, just over 2%. So I think based off statistics, almost fully employed. And it went to a high of almost 11%. And now we've already been able to get it decreased to about 5%.
Wow,
So
you're really making progress. That's great.
yes. So
Do you think that's going to ripple across the U.S.?
I hope so. I mean, part of it, I think, is depending on some of the programs that we're able to offer. And again, I'll be able to share some of those with you. Other key focuses for us include our homelessness services. We've been a compassionate city, as you mentioned. And so we expanded our housing navigation center last year. And I couldn't get any closer. It is literally based in right behind City Hall when people were talking about concerns about that. And we have been recognized as such out of the last 5 years, 3 years as being the happiest city in the United States. We focus on equity. We're updating our climate action plan. We're working on version 2.0 right now. And we had doubled down when there was a change in the climate decision at the federal level. And we are also continuing to explore a tradition of progressive policies. You mentioned that I'm the first woman mayor, and we had our first Black council member join us this past year. And for the first time in our city's history, we are a majority women council.
Wow.
And so it's been a little bit of baptism by fire, literally, whether it's from COVID or different plagues and issues that have happened. But we're hoping to restore our city to its full extent with recreation programs, master park programs, 10-minute park pledge. And we are updating our master park plan for the first time in 25 years right now. So.
Wow. Well, we'll hear more about that in a minute. Mayor Mitchell, I want you to weigh in here. Tell us a little bit about what's happening right now in New Bedford and where you're heading with some of the forward progress.
Well, thanks, Sandra. And I just want to start off by thanking the WBC for having me today. And thank you, Edie, for your leadership and certainly bringing us together today. And then my good friend, Sandra, who has been in the thick of the work of cities for a long time and who is just so adept at bringing people together to talk about the key issues out there. And I also just wanted to give a shout out to Lily May, and she is as fabulous as she comes across. I mean, we have I have the good fortune of sitting next to her at every mayor's conference because our names are back to back alphabetically. And so, you know, I do hear a lot about Fremont and all the great things that she's doing, and she hasn't skipped a beat in the pandemic. A few things going on, well, a number of things going on in New Bedford right now. Just so for folks who aren't familiar with New Bedford, Massachusetts, we are sort of the hub city of southeastern Massachusetts. We're a city of 100,000 with a metro area of about 200 to 250,000, depending on where you draw the line. We're about 60 miles south of Boston and about 200 miles east of New York. And, you know, we have we're an older industrial city that is somewhat distinct from some of the older industrial cities in the Northeast, and for among other reasons, we're America's largest commercial fishing port. And so a great deal of our economy is centered around the maritime sectors. So because of the way we were arranged and composed, COVID did pose some unique challenges for us. So in ways that I never would have intuited, first off. So for instance, with the crash of the restaurant industry nationally and in Europe, seafood wholesale prices dropped. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal with that? But it meant that boats could not go out and profitably return with seafood. And so many boats here didn't go out. When I talk boats, by the way, but we have about 350 fishing boats home ported here. It's by far the most in the country. And then another 150 from out of state that land their fish here. So that certainly had a big ripple effect, including in the seafood processing industry, which is a separate industry, somewhat vertically integrated, but it's separate, but it still employs thousands of people here. And we have the largest cluster of seafood processors. That brought its own challenges, in part because of the risk of transmission was so high in those places. So we saw what happened in the meatpacking industry in the Midwest, and we had to take some very direct steps to ensure that we didn't have major outbreaks in our plants here, right? Food processing in many ways is similar regardless of the food, in the sense that people work on production lines, often cheek by jowl, right? They're right next to one another. And so we put in place a number of workplace safety measures to effectively preempt the virus. Separated people out with barriers and social distancing requirements and reporting requirements, a whole host of things that were effective in avoiding a big outbreak here. But it's just it was something that was unique to New Bedford, and I think it's an illustration of how cities have had to tailor their approaches to the pandemic. It plays out. It has played out differently in every city. I'll just give you a couple of other examples. Two of our best known manufacturers, Joseph Abood, the maker of men's suits, including this one, as well as Titleist golf balls are made here. The two premier manufacturers experienced the pandemic in very different ways. There aren't a lot of people buying suits out there, and for the men's suits out there right now, and I would just commend to all the mayors, please buy Joseph Abood suits. They're great suits, but there aren't many people buying them these days, and so they've laid off. They have a plant of about 800 people, and they've laid off about half of their workforce during the course of the pandemic. Titleist had a very different experience. People are out on golf courses in ways they haven't been in a generation in the last year. And so they can't make enough golf balls right now. They're hiring whoever they can pull off the street because the demand is there. So, so the pandemic did hit us in some peculiar ways. I mean, the upshot is, going into the pandemic, we were at about 5% unemployment. We shot up to 24% unemployment suddenly within a matter of just a few weeks. And that was certainly a shock to the city. And we will, get into in a moment, I think, some of the work that we've done to support businesses, and particularly women-owned businesses. But, we are emerging from this. The unemployment rates come back down to 10%. And I think our manufacturers in the fishing industry are much surer footing. The fishing industries going like gangbusters right now because restaurants are opening again all over the Western world. And our restaurant scene has actually done pretty well. We're at a net +5 restaurants during the pandemic. That is to say, 5 more have opened up in our city than have closed during the pandemic. So we've avoided some of the national calamity in the restaurant industry. And there are a number of reasons for that, which I can get into in a moment.
John, I wanted thank you for that background. And I think I heard from people that actually live in New Bedford, friends of mine, that said Mayor Mitchell doesn't wait for the feds to take charge, or the state, or any other organization. You sort of take the lead in really figuring out what your community citizens want and need and going for it. And you mentioned that you created a lot of workplace safety factors to get people back to work safely, especially in the seafood industry, as you mentioned. But what inspired you? I feel like these conversations are really inspirational, not only whether you live in a city or lead a city. People want to know, how did you actually do that you just took the action and went for it?
Well, the response to COVID has been an exercise from the start, and learning something that nobody's ever experienced before. Nobody who's under the age of 102, right? And so, we tried to get smart about this as quickly as possible. And so that meant like team meetings every single day with healthcare professionals and others inside and outside of city government to understand what we were dealing with. And we continue to do that. It's still we're still figuring it out in many ways. We know a lot now, but we don't know everything. And among the things that we started to see is that we saw what happened with the meatpacking plants in the Midwest, where and different parts of the Midwest and different cities of different sizes with huge outbreaks, especially among immigrant workforces here. And, we have a lot of that here. A lot of America's seafood goes through New Bedford. And we knew that, the workplace conditions are very similar, regulated by the USDA, just as the meatpacking plants are, but that wasn't going to be enough to stem what were really serious disease transmission risks among a very vulnerable population. And so we just said, nobody else is going to do this for us. So, I'm a lawyer by training. So I'm a former federal prosecutor. So we just set about, I wrote a lot of the regulations personally, and I said, this is what needs to happen. We put in an executive order. I don't know whether I had the legal authority to issue all these workplace orders, but minor detail, I did anyway. But we reached out to a lot of the businesses. We said, you need to comply with this. You need to separate people out. You need to do temp checks. You need to report information to the health department. You need to take care of your folks. And most of them don't speak English. And it's not to say that nobody got COVID in these places, but, we didn't have the massive disruption in our workforce that those other places had. And so, it's an example of like what mayors need to do sometimes. You just need to, to try to figure it out as best you can, and then not wait to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and then go forward.
Right. Well, it's a good role model for cities to follow, I think. And before we go on, we're going to now move to some real specifics, I hope, from both mayors. But if you have questions, one of the benefits of having mayors on these sessions is that wherever you live, you could implement some of these solutions, some of these actions where in your place, in the city you live in, or in your organization. So Lily, I want to shift to you now and have you give us some examples, really, some stories of how you really helped support small and medium-sized businesses, especially. Feel free to talk about the restaurant industry, the retail industry, of everything that was affected during the pandemic. I think tourism and travel have been hit the hardest. So tell us a little bit about specific things you did, Lily.
Sure. So it'd be my pleasure to share some of the efforts that we've worked on. As I mentioned earlier, we focused on a small business recovery and business economic framework. There are 3 pillars, which I mentioned: small business recovery, opportunities in workforce development, and rebuilding a resilient tax base. So regarding small business recovery strategies, some of the things we've done is increased communications, our outreach, working with the chambers. We had signs that were open for business, as well as on the website, a pop-up patio information, so you could see in a map where those locations were. We've provided technical assistance, digital marketing training. We have a small business advocate, and that's important because when we talk about opening and reopening safety, it also requires us to reimagine how we as cities do our interactions. So we have also transitioned a lot of our services to more online, so such as online permitting. And we've also had 3 specific programs that focus on small businesses. We've had the discussion about making some of those pop-up patios. It's in addition to looking at how we handle transportation and safety, but also creating some of that slowed down traffic. So we create some of that space that allows them to do outdoor dining. And that's been of particular importance for us when we've had restaurants, and just like everyone else impacted from the executive orders that Mayor Mitchell had just mentioned for Bedford in terms of opening and reopening. We've also embarked on a professional photography campaign because one of the things that we've loved is seeing the food and the ways that different businesses have handled the reopening. And we also have a small business advocate that I mentioned earlier that has been helping us with the evolution of our COVID hotline. In fact, for one of the small businesses, when we think about ways to reimagine businesses, there's one of my favorite restaurants here, a coffee shop that does halal meats, as well as they serve us amazing Kashmiri chai, which is pink. And because of right now in this Ramadan, so Ramadan Mubarak to all, and we are doing an event this Friday for me where I'm saying break fast with your mayor. And because of that, they're opening in the evening later after the sun has set, and they're able to enjoy food. So I'm doing an event at 9 o'clock at night instead of early in the day to be able to break the fast with your mayor.
Oh, that's great. I have to interrupt you. You mentioned about all of this new activity online. I understand you actually created an interactive map so that I, as a citizen, could actually click on it and find a
Yes.
small business I'd want to patronize.
There's an interactive map, and also because of the concern with revenue stream, we've also partnered with a local vendor for online. So we had these Yifty gift cards. And so we are telling people to buy and support local businesses in Fremont. And there was incentives from that. And that was actually sponsored and funded by some of our local businesses, such as Seagate and Facebook, that helped us with that. So basically, some of the businesses are encouraging others to purchase gift cards, and that allows them to be able to get the revenue stream for the small businesses in this time period when not everything was able to open directly.
Right.
And it was encouraging people to support local small businesses.
Genius.
Other efforts are, and you talk about, is workforce development. And we were recognized as being one of the best cities for women in STEM. And we focus on building a better pipeline, in particular when we talk about new manufacturing employees. And it's a huge industry because when we have a lot of people at the entry level and we have some very skilled professionals, we have amazing educated workforce. Some of the best product in Fremont is the people. But we were trying to assist displaced service sector employees, as you talk about right now, for retail and other those impacted by this COVID pandemic right now, into manufacturing. And so one of the pilots that I'm happy to share about is our Earn and Learn Fremont, because we were talking about it during the holiday. It spells ELF, but it's like a self-ELF. It's an 8-week pilot program that we just completed about 2 weeks ago, and it provided paid training and on-the-job training from, in this case, it was Evolved Manufacturing. They had 21 participants, and it was 8 weeks of work where it started off about $18 an hour, and they received online training at the site with 6 weeks, and we partnered with Ohlone College in their Smart Manufacturing certificated programs. And I'm really pleased to share that all 17 participants were able to, the graduates were able to receive offered positions at Evolve or a local manufacturer. So in this 8-week time period, not only are they able to gain new employment, but to gain additional skill sets in that support. So it's a pilot program that we're hoping to be able to replicate with other manufacturers or other businesses that are looking for skilled workforce when we partner with education. And finally, rebuilding tax base. Fremont's manufacturing industrial sectors, like I said, were a stable source. Our strengths are biomedical, clean tech, and auto AV. So we helped with this area. And in particular, one of the companies I just celebrated their 10th anniversary is BI, which is Boehringer Ingelheim. And during this time period, when it comes to COVID and our responsiveness, whether it's in the biomedical sector, in biosimilars, or in building COVID supplies with PPE, ventilators, test kits, and vaccines, we essentially were making those. And some of the manufacturers that I've been working with to help them revamp their business, like Evolve, which was prior building diabetes test kits, to building COVID test kits, to building ventilators. And at this time, we've built over 3 million of these as a result. And this has helped us generate interest in our real estate development, and really helped us with the purchases of equipment and B2B supply chain activities. So when we talk about these types of manufacturers, it's also about sourcing of their materials and supplies, and then also to be able to deliver them. I also sit on Alameda County Transportation Commission and focus on some of the goods movement. So it's not enough just to build them, it's important for them to actually get out there to the people themselves. And so us being centrally located between other cities that are major manufacturing, it helps us to be able to create that regional bind in terms of how we can work and support one another.
Wow, that is a long list and great stories. It's very impressive. I mean, I think you must be spending a lot of time also just communicating these programs, right, Lily?
Yes, I will give you a perfect example. When we talked about some of this COVID impact, and unfortunately, you've probably seen, I also was the state president for Asian school board members. So I served 2 terms on the school board before joining the city council. And so I was the state president for Asian school board members, and I was the former national president for APAMA, which is Asian Municipal Elected Officials. And during this time period when this pandemic first struck, there was a lot of impact to a lot of our minority and Asian restaurants. And so we created a press release as well as social media awareness through some of the larger ethnic publications such as World Journal and Tsingtao, which are nationally recognized, to let them know that they shouldn't have fear about dining in Asian restaurants. And in particular, more recently, during this period of some of the unfortunate hate incidents that we've been seeing throughout the nation, I personally have visited in a couple weekends about 7 of our Asian malls and retailers, and I've talked to about 60 or 70 of the businesses personally firsthand, and learning about how these policies not just affect in terms of safety and creating hotlines, but more so even on the PPE or some of the aids in terms of the state programs. And when programs are created for people to apply, some of the requirements can be impactful in terms of limiting who can apply. Things like looking at 2 years of income taxes. When some of these businesses that were most directly affected spent a lot of their capital in terms of investing in real estate and upgrades right before the pandemic, and only to be shut down immediately and not be eligible for some of those programs that they need the aid from. So these are just some of the things you wouldn't hear unless you get to hear firsthand from the community.
That's right. If you're really inside on the inside. Mayor Mitchell, how about you? Give us some real examples. And we already have some questions coming in from the audience, so we're going to spend a lot of time doing that as well. But John, tell us what you've done that's really, you think, is maybe a story, an example that other communities, other organizations could also use.
Yeah, we've taken a similar approach, and I'll just sort of talk a little bit broadly about it, and then I'll offer a couple of examples. So one of the things that I've emphasized all along has been for folks in city government, as well as the business leadership in our region, is that we have to think both short-term and long-term, right? We have to deal with the exigency of the pandemic and its economic fallout, but we also have to understand that the pandemic will end someday, and that we will have to continue to compete. And so we've had this walk and chew gum mentality the entire time, and I think that's going to help us emerge from the pandemic, right? So I'll talk about the long term in a second, but there are things that we've had to do to deal with what's right in front of us. So like Lily, we've had to really promote small businesses and particularly restaurants. Early on, there was it feels like a long time ago to everybody, but early on, it felt like, nobody was sure whether they could safely do takeout from restaurants, never mind dine in. And so, what we tried to do, I decided, well, I'm going to sacrifice my figure for the good of my city. And so I kind of ate my way through the city. I was dining out every single night, doing Instagram and Facebook posts for, like every restaurant in every corner of the city. And, I can speak with authority to the risk of COVID-15. I'll have to lose all that weight afterward, but it did help. I think it helped people understand that it was okay to dine out. And so that played, I think, a big part in it. There was a focus on women and minority-owned businesses. We tried to hit them a little bit more than others, frankly, because we wanted to make sure that everybody was engaged and we're all in this together. Of course, we've had, I think we've benefited from having the business assistance programs in place to react to the fallout of the pandemic. We do a lot of work with small businesses in the way of technical assistance and lending programs that I think we were able to ramp up somewhat seamlessly to provide all the things they needed. So that included like workshops and permitting guidance, and business counseling, and there was a need for a lot of business counseling. Businesses had to pivot nimbly to deal with something they never expected. I mean, restaurant takeout is a perfect example of that. The restaurants, I think, nationally that have been able to weather the storm thus far are the ones that have figured out how to do takeout, and it's not necessarily intuitive. And to do the outdoor dining and all that. So we've done technical assistance with 168 small businesses. 44% of them are women-owned, and they've, by and large, with a couple of exceptions, have been able to to stay afloat. And we've continued our lending programs both through our traditionally funded program as well as through funding from into the same program from the CARES Act. And we've given out about 67 loans through those two programs during the pandemic. And about a third of those are women-owned. We'd like to get that number up. But we've also tried to be nimble in other ways, and sometimes very customized in the things that we do. Right? Again, outdoor dining is a great example. No restaurant is simply situated in its outdoor space, right? There have to be accommodations made, and we've in order to keep things going, and we've been able to do that, creatively in a number of settings. So I'll give you an example of one woman-owned business, a Portuguese restaurant called Tia Maria's, which in the Portuguese community is a sort of a universally known term. Everybody has an Aunt Maria. So in the case of Tia Maria's, which is owned by a woman named Jessica Coelho, who's a real go-getter, she said, "This is what I need. I need to open up my sidewalks, whatever the sidewalk to dining, no matter what state regulations say. And I need to bring people in very visibly." So we had city employees build her a parklet, right? It's sort of a wooden platform that extended her sidewalk cafe straight out. So she doubled her the square footage available to do outdoor dining. And then we changed the street from 2 ways to 1 way so that cars could fit by, right? So and added some lighting and did some other promotion. And she hasn't skipped a beat. She's done fabulously well. In fact, her sales are actually up over pre-COVID. So we might actually come back and ask her for some of the money back. I'm just kidding. But those are the kinds of things that you have to do. I mean, we've lightened up on regulations in a number of ways. We're not charging for parking in certain parts of the city. We didn't charge at all in our downtown for many months. The other thing that we did in general, I think this is really, it's something that people notice subconsciously, but was really important. And it has to do with the built environment in the city. So I thought it was really important in order to maintain the public confidence, both during the pandemic and our confidence to emerge from the pandemic, to make our city look physically appealing. So we bent over backwards to maintain parks and streetscapes, and to trim trees, to put banners up in places. And we were just really compulsive about cleanliness and orderliness so that people didn't feel like things are falling apart.
Right.
And I think that will set us up well to emerge. And it's just not, it's something a few people have commented on, but it also, people feel like the city is still progressing, notwithstanding the problem of the pandemic. So that puts us in a good place in the long run. In the long run, I won't go into too much detail, but we're trying to set ourselves up, despite the pandemic, for the next 10 to 20 years or so, right? Cities have to think long term. We certainly do here. Among the big things that we're pushing on, we're pushing on a couple of big strategic initiatives. During the pandemic, we announced that we're creating a new industrial park, an advanced manufacturing park. We're taking our municipal golf course partially offline, and we're developing it. It was a complicated process involving, the replacement of dedicated parkland with other available land. But suffice to say, we moved heaven and earth to continue to make that happen so that we can throw the doors open to this space, which we'll do in the next couple of months, to commercial development, so that manufacturers that are expanding can set up there. We have a tremendous amount of pent up demand, and we'll be ready for that. The other big thing is the offshore wind industry. New Bedford is about to launch America's first industrial scale offshore wind farm, the Vineyard Wind Project. And it's the first of many in the pipeline. And we have committed, not despite the pandemic, that we are going to win the competition among East Coast ports and attracting an industry cluster. And we're in good shape there. We established with our community college in the middle of the pandemic, America's first training facility for offshore wind. So the workforce end of things we didn't neglect. We continue to push on all these major initiatives: port infrastructure, business development planning, business relationships in offshore wind. So all of this is happening as we're emerging, as the Biden administration is moving ahead with offshore wind in a very robust way now. We're ready for it because we didn't tap the brakes during the pandemic.
Yeah, you were ready for it a while ago, as I recall.
True. All
And
true,
John,
Sam.
and John, it's interesting what you said about the physical environment of your city, you know, keeping it clean and making it an appealing place. When you talk to people about what's important about where they live, you know, certainly safety is usually at the top of a list, but also being a clean, attractive place to live, certainly dealing with the climate issues, you know, whether it's at a port or whether it's with energy or transportation. But I wanted to mention one of the questions that came in, and actually, Shirley Sharma just asked us a question, and it's really related more to the social and racial justice issues that every city is dealing with in different ways. She says, "I'm a local, but I'm brown in color. What happens when locals tell you you are not local, although you are often, or that you are more local than the locals? How do you deal with that in the context of revenues for business?" And both of you could probably talk to that question. She also writes, "The legislator of Westchester said this horrible thing to me when I was scouting for business years ago. I believe she owes me a public apology." So we won't go into that part. I don't think we can deal with it. But in terms of racial and social injustices or creating justice, what are your ideas about how you're making New Bedford, and Lily, how you're making Fremont, you know, a really inclusive society, a society where people feel like they belong? John,
Yeah, it's been a difficult year in that way, and you know, what played out, you know, here in New Bedford and every other city in America has I think forced what what we all hope is a set of permanent changes that make us a better society, better cities, and a better country. But it will take work and take focus, and it will be tempting to take our eye off the ball, which we ought not to do. So, you know, here in New Bedford, it's continuing to force a number of conversations. We had a commission about concerning the police department's use of force policy. That was a good discussion that led not only to changes in the use of force policy, but also, you know, more generally the ability of the police department to command trust among all of our residents, and so which is something that you can't ever ignore, in my view, and you know, I think it's forced us to say, you know, to think about equity in the way that a lot of other more places are doing these days, which is it's not quite the same as equalizing things in the sense that you provide sort of a level set of resources. I think you have to understand that there are real structural barriers in place, whether they are economic or they're cultural, whether they're racial, that require additional resources and perhaps more importantly, more energy to overcome. And I think that reorientation here will do us a great deal of good, so that, you know, folks like the person asked the question won't be hearing comments like that ever again.
Yeah, good idea. Lily, what's your take on that issue of creating a culture of inclusiveness?
Sure. I was going to mention I can definitely relate to some of the comments that Shirley has mentioned. Unfortunately, firsthand, I've experienced some of that. Growing up, I was born in Chicago, grew up in Philadelphia in the suburbs. And so I've unfortunately during a period of Vietnam War era, so I've experienced some of that negativity firsthand. Fremont, I forgot to mention also, is 5 historic cities that came together 65 years ago, or towns that came together to form our city. And so there is a lot of those characteristics. But what we've done in terms of creating that awareness is, as a minority majority city, is we've also had a campaign that went out to not just our restaurants and businesses, but locally it says Fremont stands united against hate. And in partnership with our police, we also created a pamphlet that talks about what's a hate crime. With our local DA, we also created a public service announcements in terms of hate awareness, and the county has since created a public services hotline. In particular, during the Lunar New Year, we also created some of those literatures and flyers that went out both in English and Chinese and other languages. We also have the largest Afghan population outside of Afghanistan in our city. So we have some, if you've seen The Kite Runner and some of those, the author came from Fremont. But it talks about how we are able to embrace others. We also have a habit of doing every year an interfaith worship for Thanksgiving, and also Interfaith Awareness Day. That's important because I can easily walk into a gurdwara, a mosque, a Buddhist temple, a Jewish temple, and I feel very much at home. And so we're a community that's incredibly diverse. We have over 105 languages and dialects being spoken. And so that requires us, even when we did things like redistricting a couple years ago when I first came on as a mayor, from going at large to districts, we made sure to include translations to over 8 languages when we did that process. And that's important now too. When this first started, I was on a panel with another mayor that talked about COVID-19 and racial disparities, whether we're talking about ethnic, historical issues, or some of the concerns right now with social justice. We had an Engage Fremont discussion when it came to policing, where we updated our use of force policies. We had over 6 town halls. Fremont also has experienced some of those demonstrations that many have seen throughout the nation. We had over 11 demonstrations, and I personally walked in 7 of those. Some of the other ones, they asked me not to be part of it. So that's something that I didn't participate if they wanted to honor the organizers' support. But it's not something that we're just one and done. It's something that we believe in. And it also applies to our small businesses. When it comes to our grants, we've given out over 1 million in grants, using in the beginning 400,000 from community block development grants, using 250 in county grants, using another 400,000 through East Bay Economic Development in partnership with Fremont's investment. So in total, about $1 million in this past year. And then when we talk about pipeline and building the future, I feel it's important. And when I was the school board president, we also had a council of presidents, and that's working with the Latino, Black, Native American, and Asian caucuses when I was the president of that, to reconstitute and talk about the policies and issues that pertain to that. And I'm a little biased also. I also have a fun activity that I do every year. Besides Read Across America, we also do Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day. And for manufacturing day tours, 20% were in the city of Fremont from California. And we worked with over 1,400 girls and 120 locations, I believe, throughout the United States, and trying to get more girls involved in those days. And I've gone out to participate also with SWE, which is the Society of Women Engineers. And that was, I think, started at my university, Drexel in Philadelphia, many, many, many years ago. And that's important for us because when we are allowed the opportunity to connect students to hands-on experiences to understand where they can benefit from these opportunities, it allows them to have better ideas of what the workforce is like. So even in terms of access, we have this at our libraries in terms of maker days, and in terms of our maker space that we have there. And that way it's accessible to anyone in our community. So that's some of the things that we think is important for when it comes to education and access and equality, is to be able to provide that to the community as a whole. And so those are the things that we try to champion.
That is great. I love this Introduce a Girl to Engineering. We definitely need more focus on that, don't we? Edie will confirm for sure. I want to get a couple more ideas from you because we just have a few minutes left, but I want to, I'd love for both of you to give some advice, step out of your box of tradition, which you're actually neither of you are in it really, but sort of think, around the difficult questions that we're dealing with. John, you mentioned trust. Lily, you mentioned connecting with others. For me, we have to move forward in new ways. Some of the institutions that served us 20 years ago are no longer working. Ways in which we procure goods and services for cities, it's broken for the most part. So I'd love for both of you to sort of say some advice to other cities, to other people that live in cities. What should they be doing to not only support the growth and the prosperity of their city and the businesses there, but also to to help sort of change the paradigm, if you will. You know, let's get more women involved, more people of color. Let's figure out how to have pay parity. Let's figure out, you know, some of these basics that have really plagued our society and our cities for years. What's your answer to that, Lily?
So I think some of the ways that we can help create that is to replicate that examples. We've also, as I mentioned, biomedical manufacturing is one of our key industries. And I was really pleased to see when we had a panel of people talking about that, 3 of the panels for our region were all women. And 2 of them actually came from our city. And so it was talking about how we're able to network and create those casual conversations that allow for them to create more awareness. We have hosted Clean Tech Open mixers here in our city. We've also done a lot of that interactions, and our economic development department itself also, I have to say, I'm very pleased with the strength in that. And of our team, the majority are women. We have one gentleman who also helps champion this, but that helps us in terms of the outreach, in terms of their efforts. And they are not just here to bring a business to the city of Fremont, but to ensure that they have all the resources that are needed for them to continue to thrive and succeed. We do take, in pre-COVID times, tours regularly to from our council members as well as myself. I visited about pre-COVID about 60 businesses a year. From everything, not just ribbon cutting, but actually understanding the meats and the inside workings of the company. My background originally was in technology. I was a worldwide sales controller, and I also was in some of the supply chain aspect and operations. And so therefore, when I visit the companies, I can understand firsthand how our policies and decisions on how we interact with them are able to then drive their business and ensure that they're able to succeed. Everything from real estate investment, expansion, where do you want to grow your business, and looking at how we can help them succeed. As I mentioned earlier, Boehringer Ingelheim, when they started in our city 10 years ago, they were 150 employees, and right now they're at over 700. And I'm proud to say that, you know, we were recognized for being one of the strong cities for women in STEM, and 70% of their workforce is women and minorities.
Wow.
And even looking at the future of workforce, when we talk about how we return, and I'm looking at some of their future building plans in terms of, you know, many of the companies here are trying to figure out what's the new workspace like? How is it going to be maybe more open, more collaborative? Is it going to be something where some of the employees are going to continue to work remotely? And how do we address that in ways that make sense for them in their expansion, and how they can utilize even things like their equipment and asset management, so that these are ways that we can help them in terms of cost and in being collaborative. It allows them to build that success that all tides race everyone's ships. I know I'm looking at Mayor Mitchell on
I appreciate the maritime reference.
But you know, that is what we're trying to do, is how do we ensure that we connect those? I think that's one of the most important things. Coming from networking before, I think that is a key area. I feel I serve as a hub to bring people who need services to those who are able to deliver them, and how do we marry them?
Yeah, well, we certainly can't underestimate the power of being present. You know, I feel like it's been more difficult this past year with COVID, but you know, however we do that, I think you know, people care about that. They want to see their government leaders, their mayors out in their premises, et cetera. John, what's your advice for the future? What are you suggesting that city leaders or people that live in cities do going forward?
Well, I think just the point about barriers and how we address them, and how we use this moment as a way to really usher in lasting change. I'd say, you know, I think probably the most important thing is to recognize that those barriers exist and not shy away from them. You know, and because they are real, and if we are to make the most of this moment, we have to continue to confront them. So, you know, what we do here is, you know, in looking at gender equity, you know, what we try to do is we understand, we try very hard to understand the needs of women-owned businesses, and we put our shoulder into it by ensuring that not only women are well represented, but they actually, in effect, dominate our work. So about 60% of our economic development folks, personnel, and consultants are women. Our entire planning department, save one employee, are women, and so I think we've tried, and we've done that. We hire the best. Period. Full stop. But that also means when it's not enough just to say that. It's enough. It's rather appropriate to say, look, the best means that we're going to have people who will help us achieve the goals we have, including working our way through the barriers that we have as a society. When it comes to minority-owned businesses, I mean, the reality is that we understand that when we interact with the business community writ large, that there are certain segments of it that don't hear the message, and that we have to work harder to ensure that, especially among our minority business community, that they're getting all the messages that they need, and that they're interacting in ways that are in effect on par with everyone else. And that's been, it takes more effort, and that's what we're committed to. And we can't, I've told all our folks, we can't tap the brakes at all. So that I think is important. I think just in general with cities, I mean, there is a great, it remains to be seen how much of a resorting is going on among cities. I mean, in cities around the country, the major metros have been living in a golden age for the last 20 years. And we're not part of a major metro. We're not a satellite of Boston or anywhere else. And so, we see that we experience the effects of that. Now we're seeing something quite different, which is really sharp housing demand here. Our residential properties are up about 25% since the beginning of the pandemic across the board. And so people are starting to recognize that cities that are not major metros have real value. People have embraced the urbanity that big cities have offered over the last 20 years, but they also, I think, are coming to the realization that the externalities of those cities are not what folks want. Lots of traffic, often more crime, and certainly higher cost of living and less space. And so, what we are trying to style ourselves as a city where you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have the urbanity, right? All the things that the built environment in a city like ours offers in terms of the architecture and arts and restaurants and all that stuff, walkability, but without the downsides that people are running away from in big cities. Right. So I think that how far that goes is a really big question for urban America in the years ahead.
I think it's a big question, and I think it's a mark of where our future lies. So thank you for that insight. Some of you may have heard this idea that there's been an urban exodus, but I think it's more appropriately termed urban shuffle. People are moving around different cities and finding, just as you said, John, some of those amenities that are special in smaller towns and towns away from the metropolitan areas. I want to give a big thank you to you, John, and to Lily. We have several city experts on this call I've seen, including Ron Blattman and John Glasgow from Spain, actually. So I hope that they have learned stuff, and will feel free to reach out to both you, Lily, and to John, if you want to pursue further questioning of what's going on in cities where leaders really make a difference. As the city leader, I think you really inspire us to think more differently about our moral compass. What's important, how are we helping the people that live and work in our cities? So really a pleasure to have you with us. Edie, a couple last final thank yous.
Good. It is clearly what you've done on best practices and hands-on leadership, how you've really inspired us with collaboration. Nobody will forget Fremont and New Bedford now because of both of you. So I think, Lily, as we think about your break fast that you're doing in the evening and your ELF program and your Asian support, including the restaurant example, and your total support of interfaith and what you've done for diversity and how you've taken manufacturing and STEM and the engineering girl and 12 different models. And John, you have really done the whole support of going to different restaurants and making sure you frequent them, and the same thing, your example in the environment and the trees and everything you've done. We won't forget Tia Maria's, right? We won't forget what you've done to really build both of you. But John, as you said, with your community college and training, there are so much in being role models that you have advanced. We will share this call and the recording very broadly. We thank the mayors and we thank Sandra Bayer.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you, guys. Bye. Thank you, John. Thank you, Lily.